Well, hello everyone, this is Jeff Clark with a very special unboxing today. Today is March the 2nd, 2019, which some of you might know as the 50th anniversary of the first flight of the first Concorde. Not the exact prototype, but this is a model I've had for over a year. I haven't unboxed it yet. It's such an important thing to do right, and I wanted to make sure that I did it right. And this came from airspotters.com, which is a company in the UK. Be real careful here. Well, we finally got it out of the packaging. Let's take a look at the box. Of course, this is a British Airways Concorde. This is a Gemini 200 G2BAW665. Get that shown here. The usual information on the Gemini box. This here is a very iconic photograph of this particular Concorde, which is G-BOAF. This flight was actually in 2004. 15 years ago, or actually 2003, on November 26, when this particular aircraft did its final flight, and everyone gathered on the Severn River to see it go by at various locations. It did a farewell flight around the UK, and this was a very iconic picture that the photographer just happened to catch on that particular day. Very cool. Other sides of the box. So it's really cool to have that picture on the back, because that was exactly 15 years ago this last year, so they had sort of a memory of it. We have a nice rundown here of the details of the aircraft. Really nice. In the clear top box, we can see the model in there. And this model is currently sold out, as you would expect. So here we have the model in the clamshell packaging. Take the cover off, and it looks like we've got some instructions here for something that we have to do with the thrust reverser. Do not operate the thrust reverser with hands or will cause damages. Okay. So they have a special tool to use, which is nice for them to put that right there in the beginning so you don't do that. Okay, we've got the gear separate, of course. Nice. Okay. That looks really cool, nicely detailed. We'll definitely be using that. Even has the special wheel for the to avoid the tail strikes. It's pretty cool. Okay, we got a number of associated parts in here. We have door covers for if the model's in the in-flight position, and then we also have the visor, depending on whether the model's going to be used in the nose down position or the nose up position. That's pretty interesting. So we'll have to check that out and see how it looks. Most likely we'll have it in the nose down position, but it's nice that they have included that component. Protective plastic on the top. Here we have a stand. Would have been nice if Gemini could have done something a little bit more special with the stand, considering it's Concorde. It's not just a standard model that you can use your regular old metal stand on. But I guess that would have been a nice thing if they could have done that. Just added the registration or something like that. Okay, there's a couple of pieces in the box I can see. Oh. Looks like the thrust reverser, to make sure that I don't miss any. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3 set in place, which means I'm missing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll have to make sure that all those pieces are in there and included. Wow, that's such an awesome piece of kit. Unbelievable. So this is G-BOAF, and the serial number on that is 216. And basically the Concorde was devised and sort of developed in their early 50s with a discussion between the British aircraft establishment, or excuse me, the Royal Aircraft Establishment, and basically that was asking a gentleman by the name of Morian Morgan to establish a group to determine potential options for supersonic transport aircraft. And so that group formed in 1954, and then they started a further committee in 1956 to study the supersonic transport aircraft committee, and working towards developing a supersonic aircraft, knowing that the British were also, or excuse me, the U.S. was also working on a potential supersonic transport type of aircraft. They wanted to make sure they didn't miss out on potential aircraft production for companies wanting to get into that line of transportation, thinking that basically companies were going to want to, airlines were going to want to use a supersonic transport aircraft, and that was going to be the new future of airline travel. So there was a group that were working on the delta wing design, which is for high speed because they want to go supersonic. So maximum speed is required, and in order to achieve that, this delta wing design was utilized. One of the difficulties that comes across with a design like this is it doesn't generate the same kind of lift as a normal aircraft, so a swept wing aircraft. So it actually produces a lot of its lift at slow speed, so landing and takeoff in a very high angle of attack. So that was one of the features of it, is it generates a vortices on the upper surface of the wing, and that vortices is what generates the lift. So it's definitely a requirement, and that vortices can be increased by lengthening the wing along the fuselage to generate more of that force. So that is another reason why the wings and such have this very unique shape, the slender delta. So the French were also working on a supersonic transport design, and eventually sort of formed a partnership with the British design group Bristol to build this model. And when they came together with their unique designs individually, they looked very similar. There was a partial reason for that, because it seemed like some of the designs might have actually been transferred between one group and the other, but it helped to actually move things along very much more rapidly. So that wing design was designed by Johanna Weber and Dietrich Kookman, and they came to a presentation with Morian Morgan, who was the person tasked with developing this equipment, and gave him their study for the delta wing design they'd come up with, and he was convinced, and that was really basically the project was getting off to its roots at that point. So then we started moving forward into developing a more advanced design for a 4-engine supersonic transport. Concorde means agreement or harmony or union, and that's why it was touted as that, with the union between the French and the British group. So Sud Aviation was the French group that were working with this company, BAC, in the UK, and were trying to develop this aircraft for supersonic transport. And they were using a lot of design from the original Vulcan, which is a very unique British bomber from the 50s and later years. So the Concorde operated from 1976 until 2003, and it can fly at twice the speed of sound, Mach 2.04, which is 1,354 miles per hour. That's just unbelievable how fast this aircraft can go. They built a total of 20 aircraft. They were originally hoping to build 100. There was orders for 100 of them, but fuel prices, noise pollution, the building of the 747, the DC-10, getting people across the Atlantic cheaply was favored. But the need for people to get places quickly was a luxury with luxury, and it was made it worth the price to spend almost $8,000 on a ticket, and then which is about $12,000 in today's prices. But to get from an 8-hour trip to down to 3.5, I think it's probably well worth it. So there was a total of 20 aircraft that were built, 2 prototypes, including GBSST, which is the Fleet Air Arm Museum. I have been on that aircraft and got to tour that a long time ago when I was a kid. Living in London, we were right underneath the flight path of Concorde, so it flew over 2 and 3 times a day, as well as many other aircraft from around the world. It was a really special time. Amazing to hear how loud that thing is in person. There were 2 pre-production aircraft, including GAXDN, which is at the Imperial War Museum in Duxford and Cambridgeshire in England, and I have also been on that aircraft as well. So that's pretty cool to have done some of those tours. This particular aircraft, first flight April 20th, 1979. It was delivered September 6, 1980, and withdrawn from service with the others on October 24, 2003. It's on display at Filton, which is where it was built and also first flown. This is the last aircraft that was built, and also flew the last Concorde flight, as I mentioned, on November 26, 2003, which is related to that picture that I showed you earlier. That was from LHR to Filton, which is near Bristol. And it did a supersonic round and then an honor lap, and managed to go to a number of cities where components of it were built, so people could come out and see it on that very last flight. At that time, it had 18,257 hours, and that flight was flown by Dock Captain Les Brody. This particular aircraft uses 4 Olympus 593 Mark 610 engines, and those generate 32,000 pounds of thrust. And then they also have afterburners that they utilize for parts of the trip that going during climb out and also or takeoff, and then also for traveling at supersonic speeds. Then they operate the afterburner as a matter of caution. And I think there was also some mention that they did it at landing too, just in case they needed to do a aborted landing and then touch and go. So I think I might have heard that one of the captains talking about that. So this, I've also seen the G-BOAF, which is at Heathrow. It's there sitting next to 27 left runway. And then I've also seen G-BOAD, which is in New York City on the Intrepid Museum. Really cool place to go if you haven't seen that. Definitely worth going. So today, as I mentioned, 50 years ago, André Turcat flew the first Concorde, one of the French prototypes, and it wasn't a supersonic flight, just a very short trip, but was really embarking upon a new era in jet aviation and supersonic travel. Wow, I mean, just to see that plane fly over and how loud it was, would just shake the ground, and you couldn't talk on the phone. It was unbelievable. The program was originally supposed to cost some $70 million, but ended up costing $1.3 billion. It's just such an expensive aircraft to develop for as few as they made. They did have some limitations in the fact that tickets need to be expensive to pay for the cost of the program, and also for the fact that it could only fly supersonic over oceans. So that basically was created a huge challenge. So they flew this from London Heathrow. Also, the French flew theirs from Charles de Gaulle to Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C., or just outside, and then also to JFK. And those were their main money-making routes. So let's take a look at the aircraft here. I'm going to worry about these afterburner pieces a little bit later, but for now I want to just kind of get this thing and just check it out because it's so beautiful. It's just sitting right here. And this model does faithfully reproduce that iconic nose cone. They do have the visor, as you saw. It does have a degree of tilt. I don't know if it's as far as it is supposed to go, because I believe it actually goes lower than that. For taxiing and takeoff, they would use a 5-degree nose down configuration, but for landing and the high angle of attack required to maintain lift at low altitude or slow speed, they would have to have the nose further down. That's also the reason why the gear is so tall on the Concorde, is because it had to have such a high angle of attack on the runway in order to get off the ground. So we have our pitot tubes there on the nose cone and a static port. This is some kind of lift device here. This strake. We have the cockpit windows. Oh, and they have the visor in position if you're using the down position. That's pretty cool. British Airways with the One World logo next to the door there. Really nice to see that. And we have the L1 door. The British Airways swish here. This is the Chatham Dockyard livery, which was the British Airways utilized the Chatham Dockyard on the Concorde first before rolling it out to the rest of their aircraft. So it got this paint job in 1997. Very small windows on the Concorde. There was one reason for that, was that if the aircraft did have a depressurization problem, then smaller windows meant that the depressurization took longer, allowing the pilots to take it down to a safe altitude. The L2 door. Do not walk in this area marking. And then do not walk beyond this line. It's pretty cool. Here's the L3 door. Our registration, G-BOAF. I'm guessing these might be static ports, but I'm not sure. The Concorde does not have a horizontal stabilizer. This is APU intake, I would guess. An APU exhaust hole. So beautiful. We have emergency cut here markings. Guessing these are some sort of antenna, but I'm not exactly sure. We have what's most likely a VHF antenna, an emergency cut here marking. One of these is probably a SATCOM antenna, and the other one's probably an AC, air traffic control antenna. And the model's quite large. I mean, the aircraft itself is 202 feet in length. That's 6 feet shorter than an Airbus A330, so it's not a small aircraft. It just has a very small wingspan. Got that lift device here and our pitot tubes. Not sure what these markings are here. But really nice work. So this aircraft is painted in the Chatham Dockyard livery. All of the liveries were mostly white in a high reflective white paint coating due to the fact that during supersonic travel the fuselage would get so hot. Even it would extend itself by approximately a foot during flight. So lots of stories about the navigator or the engineer in the third seat putting his hat between the bulkhead and his controls and by the time the aircraft landed, he couldn't get it out anymore because the aircraft had contracted and shrunk up. Underneath, lots of nice detail. Notice how far back the nose gear goes in the aircraft. So it's got to be a real challenge to steer and get it down the center line of a runway. Not sure what this little hole is here. I'm guessing that there should be an antenna there that has maybe come out, so maybe it's in the packaging, I hope. Here we have the hole for the stand. These might be ram air turbines. Landing gear doors. The landing gear actually had to telescope in order to fit into the space because it was so tall. And then we have the tail strike gear or prevention gear. And the Olympus 593 has these intake ramps, which allows it to control the flow into the engine. This is an afterburner engine, so it's going to generate a lot of noise, which was one of the problems of Concorde. When it was loud and it was a polluter, it was expensive to operate. Airlines could use a 747 or other aircraft to do the job, and they could make just as much money hauling people first class subsonically than supersonically. So that was kind of plus you had the crash of the Air France and Charles de Gaulle in 2003, and that was kind of, or 2001, excuse me, plus 9/11. The events there also kind of really made a big hit to air travel and really just made this aircraft almost impossible to operate. Although British Airways and Air France did make money off of it just because they charged so much money for it. But the ramps are nicely done. The markings are all looking really good. And the registration, G-BOAF. So cool. So I did get the afterburners on, but I'm missing one of them. So there's a total of 8 of those pieces, and I only have 7. The other one was not in the box. So kind of disappointing about that. And they actually do rotate to duplicate the real thing, but as they say in the instructions, don't do it with your fingers, else the pieces come off. So I used a pair of tweezers to put it on there in my microscope because it's a pretty small piece. Look how tall that gear is compared to the aircraft. That's to give it enough room off the ground to be able to land and take off. Oh, must have that backwards. That would probably not work very good on the real plane. There, that looks much more functional. And they don't really turn very much, and they don't tilt. but on an aircraft this unique I wouldn't expect it to on the model. And we got this little pair of trailing wheels just to protect the tailplane, because it has to get such a high angle of attack to get off the ground. The concern was that they would have fuselage damage if it struck. Very delicate aircraft. But that gear looks really good. Such an iconic aircraft. Lots of good videos on YouTube to check out if you haven't seen it take off or anything like that. They do have this little visor piece. So if you want to have it in the in-flight configuration, you can do that. It fits pretty flush and nice, but it doesn't have anything to hold it in place, so it's easy to get lost. So this model is sold out, but they're going to be bringing out another one real soon in the historic Landor livery. I probably won't be getting that one. This is the one I'm most familiar with. I have seen Concorde a number of times at the Heathrow Airport when I used to go there and spot planes. There she is on the stand. Pretty cool that they can have the nose down configuration. I like that a lot. And that they've included the visor. Very cool. And I just checked the box, and I found the last piece of the thrust reverser. So I don't know how it ended up getting out of the box, but I'm glad it was found. That's pretty awesome. Cool. Now I'm really happy because it's all complete and I have all the bits. Being such an important model, you want to make sure that it has all the parts. There we go. Nice. Get a good look inside those turbojets. And actually we could hear the thrust reversers after the Concorde landed at Heathrow. It was just that loud. Cool. Excellent. Well, thanks again.